Welcome to This Explainer. As a sociologist looking at modern labor trends, I spend a lot of time tracking human behavior. And for generations, honestly, the biggest trend in the world could be summed up in just one sentence. I'm gonna move to a big city and change my life, right? Places like New York, LA, San Francisco, they weren't just dots on a map. They were these massive global symbols. Those towering skyscrapers and neon streets basically promised that if you just worked hard enough, you could become absolutely anything. But today, we are witnessing a profound sociological shift. Millions of people are literally abandoning America's biggest cities. And the wildest part? This isn't just a story about financial struggle. This exodus actually includes highly paid engineers, successful business owners, and top-tier tech employees. Okay, let's dive into this, because the question we really need to ask isn't just why people are leaving. The deeper inquiry as a researcher is what actually happened to America's big cities. Are we looking at a moment where these massive urban centers have just lost their magic? Or are the cities essentially exactly the same, but the American dream itself has evolved into something totally different? Has the dream changed, or has it just changed its address? To really understand this, we have to zoom out and look at the historical baseline. Back in the early 1900s, the industrial boom drove millions out of small towns and straight into major cities. Then, fast forward to the 1980s and 90s, and you see big corporations, finance, media, all fiercely concentrating inside these urban centers. New York wasn't just a city, it was the ultimate symbol of making it. Now, the emergence of the internet in the 2000s quietly planted a seed. It started asking this subtle question. Well, if my work happens on a computer, why do I actually need a city? But it was 2020 that acted as the ultimate catalyst. When offices shut down and remote work became the norm, practically overnight, the map of America fundamentally shifted.
See, for over a century, the geographic structure of success was built on this unwritten rule of labor. Work exists where people are, and people go where opportunity exists. This centralized feedback loop is exactly what turned places like San Francisco and Chicago into global symbols of power. If you wanted the opportunity, you had to pay the entry fee. And that meant physically relocating, enduring those grueling commutes, and handing over sky-high rent just to be in the room where it happens.
But here's the thing. That rule, it's completely broken now. We can officially define this new era as the new migration. From an academic standpoint, this is a fundamental sociological shift, where people are abandoning major urban centers, and it's driven largely by decoupling geographic location from economic opportunity. We're seeing highly paid tech employees, executives, even millionaires waking up and realizing, hey, if my income isn't tied to a specific zip code, my daily life doesn't need to be either. Opportunity isn't something they have to desperately chase anymore. For the first time, opportunity is actually following them.
Now, what's really interesting about all this is the brutal economic math that's forcing even successful families out of these cities. It's incredibly stark. On the push side, you've got astronomical housing costs, tiny little apartments, and just exhausting, soul-crushing commutes. These daily pressures are profoundly shifting family priorities today. When you sit down and actually do the math, living in a major city stops feeling like living a dream and starts feeling a lot more like pure survival, even if you have a great salary. But then, look at the pull factors outside the urban core. Lower costs, significantly more living space, and the absolute ultimate luxury, more time. People looked beyond the city limits and realized they could finally reclaim the hours that the urban grind was just slowly stealing from them. Let's bring this down to a micro perspective for a second. Picture a tech worker in San Francisco, a city that we used to view as the absolute future of technology. They're looking around at their life and saying exactly this. Yes, I earn a good salary, but what do I actually have left? A tiny apartment, long commutes, and time that never comes back. It's this heavy realization that the urban promise has fractured. You wake up, you commute, you work, you come back, and repeat. Slowly, people in these environments realize they are earning an incredible living, but they've totally forgotten how to actually live.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core paradigm shift of our modern era. The very definition of the American dream has transitioned. The old metric of success was purely financial and status-driven, right? It was all about how much do I earn? But the new metric of success is totally experiential. How much am I living? People have literally stopped counting just their money and have started counting their lives. Because think about it, if you can do the exact same job from a quieter neighborhood with clearer skies, why on earth would you stay in a place that demands so much of your peace just in exchange for a paycheck?
Naturally, this shift in individual priorities creates massive, macro-societal ripple effects. When remote work severed the absolute need for expensive office space, companies obviously started adjusting. And the result? It's kind of wild. We are seeing 50-story office towers just sitting there, half empty.
Morning coffee shops that used to be absolutely packed with thousands of rushing commuters are suddenly quiet. Subway cars are emptying out, and entire downtown business districts are slowing to a crawl. Big cities operate as really delicate ecosystems. When the towering offices weaken, it's the service workers, the retail shops, the local restaurants, and the transit systems that rely on that massive corporate footprint who feel the immediate, heavy impact. But if we only look at the economics and the remote work policies, we're really missing half the picture. Because this wasn't just an economic decision, it was deeply emotional. As sociologists, we know that people don't always make decisions based on statistics. They make them based on their lived experience. There's this deep, unquantifiable exhaustion associated with the constant sensory overload of massive crowds. Plus, in many major American cities, people began feeling a real lack of safety and comfort. When someone feels uneasy or chronically stressed every single day, the percentages and the data just stop mattering. Feelings become reality. And that reality drove millions toward peace, larger homes, and quieter lives.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because when these urbanites leave, a brand new sociological friction begins. Where are they going? Well, they head to smaller cities and quiet residential towns in places like Texas, Florida, or rural California. And it happens in steps. First, the well-paid remote workers migrate in. Second, their immense purchasing power drives local housing affordability down for the people who already live there. Third, traffic and congestion spike on rural roads that used to be totally empty. And finally, the very culture and identity of the destination town begins to fundamentally change, sometimes trading in those beloved local mom-and-pop shops for artisanal cafes catered entirely to that new remote work tax bracket.
And this brings us right to the perspective of the longtime residents of these smaller towns. You hear this sentiment echoing all across the country right now. Our town doesn't feel the same anymore. It is a neutral, observable fact that when people move in at scale, culture changes. Economies change. The influx of new money and new remote workers brings totally different expectations, different daily routines, and a major shift in social cohesion. Honestly, there's a hidden isolation here, too. When a town is suddenly flooded by remote workers who spend 8 hours a day behind closed doors staring at video calls, traditional neighborhood social connection often begins to really fracture. Which leads us to a pretty fascinating analytical question. Are people actually escaping big cities, or are big cities simply following them? Think about it. If millions of people move to smaller, quiet, safe havens looking for balance and space, won't those very places eventually transform into the congested, expensive hubs they were originally fleeing? Humans are always searching, first for opportunity, then for comfort, then for balance. As these residential towns swell, we face this crazy infrastructure paradox. People are escaping congestion only to inadvertently create that exact same congestion somewhere else. So, does this mean the legacy city is dead? Not necessarily. History shows us that cities are humanity's oldest inventions, and they constantly evolve. The industrial age changed them, the automobile changed them, and now remote work is changing them again. The city of the future will definitely reinvent itself. We can theorize it's going to feature way less centralized office space and much more residential living space. Commute distances will shrink as neighborhoods become self-sustaining hubs with a much deeper integration of digital life. The city won't disappear. It'll just transform to meet people's new expectations of balance.
But for millions of Americans sitting in their new backyards right now, looking at clearer skies with way less noise, the emotional realization is profound. When you ask them if they miss the city, the answer is so often, I don't miss the city, I miss the dream that brought me there. That hits hard, doesn't it? They've totally abandoned the myth that success only exists in a towering skyscraper or in a crowded subway. They aren't just leaving a geographic location, they're leaving an old idea behind. They've found that a better life, a true sense of success, can be built right where they are.
And this leaves us with one final provocative thought. As we look ahead at the next 20 years, we have to ask ourselves, will the future belong to cities or to people? The American dream isn't disappearing at all. It's just being rewritten. It is no longer strictly about where you live, but rather the life you're actively building. When people redefine success, they don't just change their own zip codes. They change the entire landscape of a country. So I'll leave you with this to ponder. If the dream is no longer found between the tallest buildings, where will you build yours?